Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to thank NADPRIAS, the organizers, for giving me this opportunity to share the dais with such scholars and dignitaries. Thank you very much. This book is complex, intricate, and I must congratulate all the paper readers that they have got the essence of the book. All the paper readers have picked up various issues of inquiry that Mr. Mandair engages himself with. The papers have been deliberated. Many of our comments are in that direction. Before I deliberate on the book as well as take the discourse forward, because I would like to humbly submit that I am a student of comparative literature, religion, and critical theory. So whatever I say here is in that premise. Mr. Mandair's book, as I got a script of that book given to me by this vendor, was so minuscule in print at first, and I had to return him back. I said, this is such a complex work and it will take me a year to go through it, and finally I got a print which could be read. It is a complex work indeed, but this complexity can be simplified if we are equipped with the tools with which the writer discusses various issues. I must, before I start deliberate on this work, must congratulate, as I said, all the writers and especially Navjot. Very brilliantly written paper, and she has actually caught on to what the main thesis of the book is. So congratulations there. As I said, Mr. Mandair has raised several issues in this exhaustive work. Through a multidisciplinary approach, Mandair builds up his thesis. And any reader who wishes to engage with this work will have to acquaint himself or herself with the whole package of critical theory and language, the problematics of language and translation. Without understanding that, nobody can profess to have studied this work. So any critical comment that is invited through the engagement with this book first needs to be fully prepared. As some of the scholars were saying here, when we misread a text, let me say, that is another kind of hegemony. The writer here has taken up several concepts like post-colonial, colonial, secular, post-colonial. I will not go into that because the title is available and we are already running out of time. What has struck me most about this book is the crisis of cultural identity. The main thesis is, of course, religion and Sikhism, and many of the scholars have deliberated on this. The main significant contribution of this book that I have found is that it raises the question of cultural identity. That Mandair wishes to investigate or interrogate the crisis of identity of a subject and a culture in the context of post-colonial, postmodernism, and globalization is evident. Mandair has in the very beginning acknowledged his debt to Derrida. and this work is written under the influence of Derrida, Lacan, Albert Sayed, Bordeaux, and many others. The work, if I can say so, has also emerged from Mandair's cultural and ontological experiences as a Sikh, as well as his intellectual travels. Through the central theme of religion, Mandair brings in the crisis of identity, cultural displacement, language, and the problematics of language and translation. Derrida in grammatology had attacked the Western logocentric paradigms and displaced the metaphysical presence with the play of difference. The Western absolutive logos of eidos or spirit are displaced by histories and cultures. Derrida, in fact, pushes the rationalism of the West to its limits and calls for history and culture to be interpreted through indeterminacy and spectral slippages. Mandair's main thesis is concerned with these spectral slippages. He concerns himself with the Western mechanism that appropriated the other or the native and robbed it of its language, cultural specificity, and gods. For Mandair, in terms of Albert Sayed, the West created a binary division between the Occident and the Orient, and what he understands as the West and the rest. The East became a kind of exotic mysticism, and the West a rational, dominant ideology. Through this comparative imaginary, according to Mandair, the West constructed its own hegemonic identity. This desire of the West, the author of the view, is resurfacing, and it is resurfacing in a new avatar that he understands as global capital. But the desire to territorialize, as he says, is again repetition. There is a repetition of the colonial empire. The repetition of the colonial empire, he says, is emerging in the form of global capital. Mr. Mandair concerns himself with how this repetition or the return of legitimizing the other creates an aporetic moment in the subject, culture, and community. He cites the example of the diasporic displacement or the population of Sikh community and others in particular. The return of religion, according to the author, has become a vehicle for such repetitions where the capital empire has displaced the colonial strategic formations. The author calls it a onto-theological matrix and says that the central role is played by religion as a driving force behind the circuit of repetition. Religion, according to him, is a cultural universal. He looks for an alternative model to relate, and this I must emphasize that he is looking for an alternative model to redefine the relationship between the colonized and the colonizer. So, what are the problematics that are faced? Language. Language is the mode of communication, but I would like to bring in Lyotard here. But as Lyotard says, it is the pedology of language coins is not free from the play of power. Therefore, the need is to empty the language of any hegemonic colonial signifier and supplement it with the cultural specific signifiers. In the context of Shri Guru Granth Sahib, because I would say I'm still a learner there, but the little I have worked on, Dr. Bhagat's work, translation of Shri Guru Granth Sahib, was especially in this direction. 2 volumes have been published, that is the Japji and Bismarck. Some Banis have been published in the Bani. And he has made it very clear in Bismarck that it was so important that the language of English be de-Christianized. Because language is culture specific too. It carries the entire ontological burden of our being. And therefore, when we translate Vaheguru into God, I would say it is not right. Vaheguru is the Guru experience. It is not just a rational word. And in this context, again, I would like to say that the first Guru of the six, Shri Guru Nanak Dev Ji in Japji, displaced the metta sign of the center. Why did he do so? That because he saw that the cultures, the dominant cultures around him were assimilating life and the immensity of life and its beauty into some kind of unitive paradigm. And this heterogeneity of the world and cultures could not be reduced to one unitive one. Another issue that Mandair has raised is translation. And translations in the hands of the dominant ideology is a problematic. Edward Sayyid has discussed this in great detail, where he says that the empire officiated translators to distort the native sacred scriptures. So much so that Prophet Muhammad was put in the seventh circle of the hell. And this conflict continues. This conflict between the West and the East is still not over. Mandair talks of how and I will just touch upon this point has been elaborated by many of you. The empire's official translation of the sacred text of the East is reductionist, and he talks of how in the late 19th century, in the hands of Sikh elite, the Sikh imaginary was reduced to the gaze of the dominant class. There were other scholars who confirmed the translation of the Granth according to the dominant ideology. This is what Mandair says. Translation, as Walter Benjamin says, puts language to test and must be one with the original. According to Mandair, colonial empire fails to do so. Talal Asad understands cultural transformation as a metaphor and how power enters into it. Authentic translation is where the translator learns to live another form of life and speaks in the language of the native. And translation is not merely a matching of sentences. Translation, any word that is translated into another language, has to also carry the load of that language's cultural specificity. The challenge that Mandair raises is to defend, develop, and elaborate the collective historical difference. For him, the vital question is to enunciate, articulate one's collective historical difference. Mr. Mandair has discussed how the subject culture is split and legitimized under the colonial regime and today in the guise of the capital. I wish to talk of how post-colonial space. Now, these are the areas in which he is discussing various things, but I wish to take the discourse a little forward and say that while post-colonialism and post-modernism may have created those spaces of repeating the colonial legitimization, but they have a different aspect too. Post-colonialism as well as capitalism have also led to a space of destructive temporalities and breakthrough. The post-colonial has also created a double, multiple existential vision. What Fanon understands as injustitial, Sayyid as disjunctive, and Bhabha as a catachrestic space. It is also called as the twilight zone. Here, the colonizer and the colonized both can coexist without hegemonizing the other. And this is the solution. We've been talking about how Mandair says that the Sikhs are still living in the colonial, they're still carrying the trace of colonial legitimization, have not completely entered into the post-colonial state. And he also raises how to develop a model, how to find an alternative that could redefine the relationship between the colonizer and the colonized. And here, both have to exist in coexistence without any hegemony. According to Richard Rorty, the world today comprises of webs of beliefs and desires which lead to conflict and openings, both conflict as well as opening. Mandair's listing of several conflicts of the Sikhs with the dominant ideology or the state perhaps can be viewed in this direction. David Punter in Post-Colonial Imaginary says a new world order has emerged, which is bitterly contested. As Mandair himself put it, we are in an ambiguous space of boundary crossing and contamination. The question of cultural identity, history remains highly contested. Chantal Mouffe is of the view that culture has to be rethought agnostically. Therefore, the idea, and he is talking about a universal with which I have problems with. Therefore, the idea of a collective or a universal paradigm is debatable. We have arrived at a situation where any unitive, assimilative paradigm will be challenged. Mandair rightly sees that the twilight zone that both Syed and Bhava talk of lies in the principle, and he's borrowing this notion from Derrida, in the principle of justice. For Derrida, justice is a gift that has certain emancipatory affirmation. The Sikh gurus have pursued this liberative energy through Sahaj, where the individual is put in a wondrous space to receive the pluralities of the universe as a gift. The vital contributions that the Sikhs can make is through the Shri Guru Granth Sahib's idea of Sahaj and Visman. Sahaj places the subject in a just coexistential space to negotiate several others, and Visman allows it to go beyond capital. It is an excess in Batai's sense to receive the several others. So perhaps the solution lies to go in this direction. We have the model. Shri Guru Granth Sahib is the best solution, and because Shri Guru Granth Sahib is a model for de-hegemonized cultures, coexistence of several cultures. So to negotiate legitimization, we need to put forward these models, and unfortunately these have not been brought into the universal use. We are using Derrida, we are using Syed, I am using them too, but we have not given these concepts to the West. And therefore, the necessary, and we have not built our own intellectual tools where we can interpret the heterogeneity or the coexistence of Shri Guru Granth Sahib. I think it is time for scholars who are engaged in Sikhism and who are engaged with the study of Shri Guru Granth Sahib to give the West our own cultural specific words and concepts. Thank you very much.